Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you all so much for taking the time to be here tonight. I'm just going to say a few words to kind of give a little bit of context and background, some of which is on the slide here. So the Stay House, Stay Healthy Coalition came together early this year, really focused on preventing evictions due to COVID rental debt, but also advancing stronger permanent renter protections around King County. In collaboration with some of the elected officials on this call, we helped to enact eviction moratoriums and other emergency protections in the cities of Kenmore, Kent, Burien, and Seattle. And then with the King County Council working closely with council members Jeannie Colwells and Gurmai Zahalai, we advanced a strong package of permanent renter protections through the King County Council for unincorporated areas of the county like Skyway and White Center. And we also supported several important pieces of legislation in Seattle this year, including closing the lease loophole in Seattle's just cause eviction ordinance and mandating relocation fees to mitigate the impact of economic evictions. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about all that legislation because we will be talking in more detail later about some of those things. So we're all here tonight because now, as we are emerging, hopefully, from the pandemic, we are hoping to continue this work, advancing stronger permanent renter protections around King County. Why is this so important? Well, we're going to hear a little bit later some data and some testimonials, but I'm just going to say a few words to get us started. Housing insecurity and evictions, which very often lead to homelessness, are huge problems that predate the pandemic. As rents in the Seattle area have been rising at a really fast pace over the past decade, it's become harder and harder for low-income households to find stable, healthy, and affordable housing. That means that if you lose your housing involuntarily through eviction, chances are you're not going to have anywhere to go. You might become homeless, and beyond all the human consequences of homelessness, from a public policy perspective, we also know how much harder and how much more expensive it is to help someone out of homelessness than it is to prevent them from falling into homelessness in the first place. That's where renter protections come in. Now, rising rents have pushed a lot of families out of Seattle into the rest of the county, especially South King County. But as all of you know, rents are also rising increasingly everywhere around King County. According to the National Low Income Housing Institute's Out of Reach report this year, in King County, a worker has to make $30 an hour to afford a one-bedroom apartment without being cost burdened by rent. And we all know lots of people in all of our cities are not making $30 an hour. So that means that people who are evicted or lose their housing due to a large rent increase are finding it harder and harder to find a place to live. Evictions often happen very quickly, and the balance of power is heavily skewed toward landlords. All of that means that it's becoming ever more important to strengthen renter protections for renters all over King County. Now, this won't be easy, and this is something that I just want to make clear to everyone right from the outset. Renter protections are controversial. There's an inescapable tension between an apartment or a house conceived of as someone's home and honoring the resident's right to shelter and basic stability versus an apartment or a house as a business investment, a piece of property that the owner has total control over. This is a tricky area that needs to be better regulated, but that's always strongly resisted. Landlords, especially large landlords, are politically organized, and their lobby groups, especially the Rental Housing Association, are consistently active in opposing pretty much any regulation that limits their ability to do what they want with their property. Our work this year with the King County Council was challenging, and the work that's been done over the years in Seattle and other cities around the county that have pursued renter protections has been challenging. The work that's been done at the state level has been challenging. It's always a fight to make progress. The landlord groups often do threaten lawsuits, and there have been a number of lawsuits against successful legislation, but it's important to note that these legal challenges have been consistently dismissed. The courts going up to the state Supreme Court have consistently sided with renters in these lawsuits. So I'm not saying all this to deter you by any means. That's not why we're here. But I just want to be very clear that if you champion renter protections in your city, there will be opposition. But that's what we're here for. That's what the Stay House, Stay Healthy Coalition is here for, to help support you in doing the right thing, even when it's hard. So all the legislative proposals that we're going to talk about tonight are very doable, and nearly all of them have already been done in various cities. So there are strong precedents that you will be able to lean on. So we're here to help you figure out what specific legislation and what public process is right for your city, and to help build support in your city as you go through that process. So with that, to start us off with an example from before the pandemic, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret to introduce our next speaker. Margaret, I think you're muted.
Thanks, Katie, and welcome to everyone. I'm honored to introduce Sarah Moore, one of the newly elected council members to the Burien City Council. Before she begins, it's just worthwhile to note that as early as 2019, Burien was one of the first cities to pass tenant protections, including just cause eviction protections. And later in subsequent years passed the rental housing inspection program, which requires property owners to have periodic code inspections. And finally, the rental housing security policy, which requires landlords, this is one of my favorite provisions, requires landlords to distribute information to tenants, including allowing tenants to make installment payments, and requires just cause for an eviction. And what I put in the chat is the actual handbook that is handed out and is part of Burien's tenants handbook. So Sarah Moore is going to talk about the journey to get to this very important legislation. So here's Sarah Moore.
Thank you, Margaret. And I was not City Council member-elect Sarah Moore when this happened. I was the co-chair of ACLU Burien People Power and volunteering in a homeless shelter. I was very concerned about tenants' rights and about people staying in housing, but I had not gone very far in the journey and was interested in getting involved, knowing I didn't know as much as I wanted. So I did what I always do in that situation and offered to take notes. And therefore, I happen to have a lot of notes for this. What we did basically is we sat down with a large group of different organizations. We had the Burien's Ecumenical Church Council, and we had educators, and we had a group called Community Visions for Burien, which is people just articulating what they want for the city. And we had quite a few youth and people who work with youth who could speak about the impact to families of having unstable housing and difficulty with rent. We sat down together and started sort of mapping out our relationships to city council members and identifying who might be already most of the way to persuading, which we had one council member, Crystal Marks, who said she was willing to go as slow or as fast as the community pushed her. So indicated pretty much an unlimited appetite to have renters' rights brought in as long as there was any support through people who we thought might be a no, and then who were the persuadables. And we then identified people who either had some type of relationship with each city council member, or who had a very compelling personal story that we thought was a type that would resonate with different city council members. Some people are very interested in promoting a good start in life for youth, and we had people who were youth offer to be the contact with that city council member, and other people who maybe wanted to hear from someone familiar or wanted to have a trust relationship with someone. And we had people who were more of, the trusted, solid community member take on those conversations. We discussed our own, we had a group of renter protections that were put out by the Housing Justice Now. And we talked about our own reactions to the lists. It was 7 items. the notice of sale ordinance, 120-day notification and relocation assistance for tenants, proactive rental licensing and inspection programs, just cause eviction, housing ombudsperson, the right to organize ordinance, and funding to support tenant organizing. And the last two, not everybody in the room was comfortable with the last two. So we discussed whether we were going to have conversations with people if we weren't 100% comfortable with them. We came to some decisions about that. And then everybody went out and worked with their council person that they had identified, and then came back and collaborated their successes with them. And it was very successful. We were able to get some of the council members that we weren't sure about on board with it. And so it did pass.
Great, thank you, Sarah, for that. Like I said, you can continue to put in questions throughout in the chat, but I do think since we got so much to get to, I might just move us along to our next section here. And this is sort of where we're going to look at some of the need that exists around this work, and then also hear from community members. And we're so thankful for them being here and sharing their stories. So let's start off. I'm going to hand this over to the folks at HJP who are going to sort of give us an overview of some of the data. And then I'm very excited. We'll ask some community members to speak. So first though, Tram or Amy from Housing Justice Project.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Kangas. I'm a social worker at the Housing Justice Project, and I'm going to share some data to show what we've been seeing regarding rent increases and just evictions overall in King County. So first, we have just recently started collecting data on rent increase from tenants calling in our hotline. So more to come. This is just kind of a preliminary look, but so far we've seen most rent increases being reported from Seattle, although Kent, Auburn, and Federal Way are really close behind. The average increase that's been reported is $269, with the largest single increase being $875. And over 80% of the reported increases have been for $100 or more. So this shows the looking at all evictions that were filed in 2019 in King County. This graph shows the state legislative districts who filed the most evictions. So the 33rd, the 30th, the 47th, the 11th, and the 37th are the top 5 for eviction filings. All of those are in or touch areas in South King County. And just to be clear, this is the top 5 state districts within King County, because we just are looking at King County evictions. Well, you can move on to the next slide.
And I know I'm sort of breaking my own rule here, but I think Nigel had a question on the rent increases. Are those per month?
Oh, sure. Like the amount increase. Yeah, that was per month. We asked tenants what their rent amount was before the increase and what it's been increased to. All right, so moving on, still with our 2019 eviction data, showing eviction filings in King County. These are the 5 cities who filed the most evictions, Seattle being number 1, but the 4 behind it are all in South King County: Kent, Federal Way, Renton, and Auburn. One thing that I think is really important to note here is that the other bar graph shows the percentage of King County renters compared to the percentage of eviction filings in each of these cities. So you can see that Seattle, although they filed the most evictions, it is actually like just like they filed less than you would expect based on the percentage of renters they hold. And on the opposite end, the South King County cities filed way more evictions than you would expect based on the number of renters living there. Kent and Federal Way are particularly bad in this respect, so just really want to highlight that. And then this is to kind of round out our overview of our 2019 data, shows the racial disparities in eviction filings, particularly alarming for Black or African American tenants. 34% of eviction filings in 2019 were against Black tenants, despite Black or African residents making up 6.3% of the King County population. So
Amy,
that, oh yes.
Can I just, sorry, going to interrupt with one question once again from the slide, a previous slide. Hugo asks, is there data from cities with population less than 60K?
Yeah, so I would say yes, like we'd have data kind of for all cities in King County. If you can go to the previous slide, Will, I think that was maybe where that question stemmed from. We just included we just included the 5 cities with the most eviction filings within King County, but if there's a particular city like Burien, you go, like we can.
Yeah, I was trying to see if I could find data on similar smaller cities, right? CTAC, because these are all bigger cities, so I'm just going by amount of population, likely more renters, but I was wondering for cities our size, around 50 to maybe 75,000, or even per capita, yeah, where that stands, to see, just to try to get a comparison for the jurisdiction sizes that we're serving.
Absolutely. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I think we could definitely get that. I think it's within our larger data set. So I'd be more than happy to work on that and kind of bring that back to you all.
If you're interested in data that's specific to your city, you can definitely shoot us an email. I think we've passed along the city of Burien's data to a few people there. But we're happy to do it again. So I'll just put my email address in the chat box here.
Thanks.
Are you, is this?
Yeah, that concludes our little data segment. But like I said, I am like more than happy to answer like questions about specific cities. Like Champ's gonna put her emails and I can share mine as well. But thanks so much for letting me share that with you all.
Thank you, Amy. Really appreciate that. And thanks to HJP and Tram and everyone for doing some follow-up data stuff too, for those that are interested. All right, so now I am really excited because we're going to turn it over to hear from some community members, specifically about the experiences that they're having. And so we've got a few folks on the line. I think, Mama Kim, can we start with you? Does that work? All right, great. So yeah, really excited, and we'll just let you go and move on to some other folks after you. Thanks.
Beautiful. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and for everybody taking the time to do this. I guess I'm going to start out with, it is impossible to rent right now on any housing, vouchers, HUD housing, unless you have perfect credit, period. You will be homeless very soon. I have been searching personally for about 11 and a half months, almost a year. Perfect rental history since 1993. Never been evicted, never had any complaints, nothing like that. Rent's been paid on time. Most of that time, I've had the opportunity of having Section 8 housing. This has been the first year. It has taken me almost a whole year, and I will be evicted soon. Not because I'm not a good renter, but solely on the fact that I cannot get into another home because I do not have credit. As soon as they hear you have a Section 8 voucher, if you are able to talk to anybody, if the computer doesn't block you first, because these amazing, huge companies, mortgage companies, the rental property managements have their bar set so high. They can pay the legal fees to tell families to go find a street, go find a tent to camp in, because you're not getting into our homes with a voucher. I tried with a year of advanced rent, my Section 8 credit, a co-signer, and I have been denied 45 units from private property management. Most of the mom and pop cannot get, if they even have their home still, those are probably the 8 families out of the 2,800 vouchers that the state people are bragging about at a higher level. Legislator, how dare you sit here and brag about all these Section 8 vouchers you have for families, when the mortgage companies and the rental property management have it impossible to rent. Work there first, because all you're doing is getting us prepared to be in a tent. I have an eviction notice as of the 28th of this last month. I'm looking at being evicted with perfect rental history because I don't have the credit. We need the help. Where are these helps? Where is these government agencies that can get us into this supernatural secret Zulu page? Where are these services? 11 months, and we are looking for shelter outside, as their mother is an activist, to where we can put our tent next. We need help. Why offer any more vouchers when you know we're not getting homes? Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing. We've got a couple more. I don't know if there are other folks in the room with you that want to speak too. Yes, okay.
Spears did want to speak. He's on the page here. Tristan did want to speak, and he is one of my community activists.
Okay, Tristan.
True, it might be under True.
True, okay, yes, True chatted. Yeah, True,
Yes,
would you like
they
to speak?
would love to speak.
Great, yeah,
Thank
True.
you.
You can go ahead, thanks. Thank you.
Hi, I guess this is my opportunity. Thank you. Can anybody hear me? Thumbs up. I don't know if I'm.
Yes, we can hear you, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the docs. Just wanted to come in and just speak on experience prior to a lot of the housing crisis. Like the way that we define this issue, first of all and foremost, is critical part as to how we play into the system and allowing these issues to flourish, because people that are unhoused, unsheltered for whatever circumstances, be it, they're fleeing domestic violence, they're just not able to find something, be a credit restriction, income limitations. It's impossible for somebody, because of, let's say that you're a trans woman that happens to, that
I think you're breaking up a little bit. Is anyone else?
Outside of these cities and county and statewide, it really restricts be reached to the people that are most in need. For instance, like if you were, suffering, living in your car, that's still considered unsheltered and houseless. But because you didn't sleep outside, technically outside in the elements directly in a tent or something, certain avenues of help automatically you forfeit because you didn't sleep outside within the past X amount of days. So it's a huge thing that, a lot of these coalitions and people need to work towards, is how they define houselessness instead of just looking at people as homeless as a broad. And starting there, working our way up into like the policies within HUD and, local county, state legislation being fixed so that people that are, that haven't slept, that are sleeping in hotel rooms or couch surfing can still access and reach these same avenues of aid that people don't get because they're merely not labeled homeless, due to the fact that they're sleeping on somebody's couch. But, they alone can. Another have that other restriction is like, I have a lot of friends and people that I work with directly in this community, doing mutual aid throughout the week. And it's appalling to just see like a lot of the people that are working, that have these conditions, that they're families sleeping in vehicles, families, that unfortunately are on Section 8 and are stuck in hotel rooms because they can't use their vouchers. Like this is sickening. And I'm nobody. I'm just somebody who's, a recipient of housing myself. And I'm blessed to have a place where I can be okay for the time being. But, as rents increase and stuff like that goes up, like those circumstances could change for myself. So I'm just trying to be proactive and get ahead of it and make sure that we address these policies head on, and stop dragging legs, because it's like I said, like people here reference, this is pre-pandemic that we've been facing these housing crisis issues. And like now we're scratching our heads still, and that's the sad part. So it's like we got to really be proactive in a lot of our approaches, because a lot of the stuff can be done. Like the lady said earlier, that the Supreme Courts are ruling consistently in favor of the tenants. So it's us building stronger unions, coming together and fighting these fights, because that's what's inevitably going to have to happen. But I mean, as we look around internationally, we've seen places, in Berlin and places, just, it's outstanding what's happening because of, the exposure of COVID and the lack of what are systems that are not really there, and the ability that the people have come together to be able to change these policies all over. So I just think that it's imperative that people start paying attention to that and start working on these definitions as well, because I mean, again, you got to think about that person that's couch surfing, that's still houseless, but because they're not considered by definition homeless, they're not accessing a lot of the aid that should be eligible for them. But that's another topic of conversation. But I just want to speak for a lot of those people, like the families that I'm helping and friends throughout the communities that live in shelters throughout different campsites and tiny home villages. Like the fact that we call these homeless encampments is sickening. These are refugee conditions in some of these places due to housing displacement. Like let's break it down. This is housing displacement, housing crisis displacement. Like if people start migrating because of climate change, which is already happening, we call those people refugees. Now, when people are fleeing a housing crisis, we don't get to just call them homeless. That's belittling. That's defining people and putting them into a stereotype that allows us to classify them as less and not let them receive the aid that they truly deserve. So just again, start defining these as what they are, like housing crisis encampments and refugees, people like that. Like these are housing crisis refugees here, not homeless people. So I'm sorry, I'm done preaching. Thank you guys for letting me talk.
No, thank you so much. Thanks to you both. That's incredibly powerful. And so thankful that, we got to hear that. Thank you. I know there's might be some other folks too. And I know Andrew too, maybe, I know you were going to speak to some of the folks that you're working with as well. And I don't know if there's anyone else, but maybe Andrew, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so at the Tenant Law Center, we focus on what I'm coining coordinated stay. So we're all the effort to get folks into housing, we're trying to help them stay housed. And we're not the folks you call when you have that unlawful detainer action in hand, that's show cause here. And you want to call us early on in your renter issue. So we get to talk to a lot of folks who frankly just can't be served by some of our really great partners because they're dealing with folks who are in absolute emergency state. And what we're learning from people is a lot of our neighbors are not living in habitable units. And maybe you're a renter and maybe you are also have some things broken in your apartment, but you have but you're able to be passive with that. Maybe you have other resources, but for the folks that are calling us, they have serious habitability issues. They're not able to access resources. It's very difficult for us to be able to find thoughtful services and enforcement agencies within cities really outside of City of Seattle. As Burien mentioned, they're really getting their their code enforcement and rental registration program up and running. Tukwila also is in that phase. So folks are, 2, 3, 4 years out. These are still very brand new programs. And what we've learned is just even that little bit of additional resource is helping residents in those communities, but not nearly enough. And so code enforcement is probably the biggest issue that we're seeing. And then that's kind of like a precursor to other issues. So in that situation, folks are sometimes getting rent increases, even though their unit's not necessarily habitable, and under the RCW, that's not a lawful action. Sometimes folks have subsidies, whether they're long-term subsidies such as Section 8 or short-term subsidies, which are offered through programs like Housing and Essential Needs or the Supportive Services for Veterans Families. They provide temporary subsidies. A lot of folks have real difficult challenges being able to get into a 6 or 12-month lease. And I often say, when a landlord says, you don't have a job and I need to know that you got steady employment and you can pay your rent. And I often say, make sure you tell them that Washington State is an at-will state and nobody has actually a right to employment. So nobody's income is secure. And matter of fact, that Section 8 holder or that HEN voucher subsidy holder might actually have more stable income in that moment than the person who's actually signing that lease. And we just see the haves and the have-nots a lot. So a lot of folks are dealing right with unaffordable rents. And now that the eviction moratoriums are letting up in most cities, that rent is becoming even more unaffordable. I recently attended a Office of Civil Legal Aid training, 2.5-hour webinar with UC Berkeley. And in that, they said that fair market rent is actually it would be $1,700 a month for a $90,000 a year earner. But the city of Seattle's Washington State Housing Tax Credit Finance units for a 50% unit, area median income unit, are going at the rate of $1,700 a month. If you think about the income that you would need to earn to actually afford that $1,700, it's well over the minimum wage and actually well over the income that actually qualifies you to get into that unit. So we're really dealing with a construct here where folks are trying to stay housed, they're trying to use these resources, and they're really fighting for safe dwellings. And so we're excited to be here with you today because we believe that a regional approach is important and we need to have this conversation. As we see, gun violence is rampant in our communities, and we really need to make sure folks are housed so we can start to help folks deal with the trauma that they're experiencing in their lives in a safer way. And housing is the first step to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And thanks to everyone who spoke. Is there anyone else who would like to sort of make any comments about the need? Otherwise, we can start to get into some of the next section, which talks about some of the solutions that we wanted to discuss with you all today. Okay, so I'm going to turn this back over to the folks at HJP, specifically Tram. So Tram, just let me know when you want me to move the slides for you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Will. So I'm Tram. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the community engagement manager over at the house. Would you want to move to the next slide? So we're just going to go through an overview of some legislative options that are on the table that other cities and jurisdictions have already implemented, but really just to kind of talk about what they are, what they do, and why they're needed. And I think you should all be receiving a copy of the model ordinance that we wrote if you haven't already. Katie, is that right?
That has not been shared with folks yet. So I don't know if is that online somewhere where you can put a link in the chat, or should I just be sending that out to people by email later?
I can put a link to it. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, I'll do it in a little bit after this. Okay, we'll just run through the options though. Will, do you want to go to the next slide? So the first one is the just cause protections. Basically, it requires a landlord to have a reason to evict a tenant or not renew their lease upon expiration. So just cause was passed on the state level this year. So, you might be wondering, why do local cities need to do it? There are a lot of loopholes and just general gaps in the statewide just cause. I think, when you're dealing, when you're in Olympia, there's just a lot more players involved, and so more concessions are going to be made. And so, for example, in the statewide just cause, there is still that loophole where a landlord can evict a tenant by opting to not renew their lease, and they don't really have to provide a reason why. This is, a huge problem, because we've already been seeing, landlords trying to get tenants to move from month-to-month leases over to short-term fixed leases, like 3 or 6 months, so then they can go ahead and evict them without a reason at the end of that lease term. And the way that they're doing that is giving them really exorbitant rent increases. So, if you sign month to month, this is going to be your rent, but if you sign onto a lease term, it'll be, like $600 cheaper. So, the tenants are having to decide between, do I pay the lower rent amount, or do I pay the higher one that will protect me, at the end of like the term? So, it's not fair for tenants, right? It's just not, like, the law is supposed to be there to protect folks, and there's just this gaping hole that we need to close. And a lot of cities have done that. Seattle has had just cause since like 1980. They just closed their loophole this year though, because it was a really big problem for them. They were still pretty high on the list of 2019 eviction filings for no cause due to their loophole. But unincorporated King County passed just cause this summer. They don't have the loophole. And Federal Way and Auburn doesn't have a loophole in theirs either. Unfortunately, Burien's does. So we can try working on closing that one, hopefully. But really, it's just to prevent landlords from discriminating against tenants. Before statewide just cause, your landlord could just not like you, and they could choose to not renew and make you homeless, which I think that just leaves the door open to so many personal biases, that it can be due to racism, sexism, transphobia, and things like that. And so that's why it's just really important for local jurisdictions to also enact their own just cause to make sure we're closing any of those loopholes and those just gaps in the statewide one. Will, next slide. So another option that we really encourage folks to do, local cities to do, is cap move-in fees and allowing for payment plans. There are a few cities in King County that have done this. So Seattle, Auburn, Burien, and unincorporated King County. Auburn and Burien allow for payment plans for move-in costs. There's not a cap on how much a landlord can charge though, but Seattle and unincorporated King County, unincorporated King County has capped their move-in costs. It cannot exceed more than 1 month's rent. This is just really important because getting into a new apartment is really expensive. Moving is really expensive, getting a move-in truck. And we're not even factoring the time that it takes for households to like physically move, to do that process, to take time out of work. And then they're being asked to pay, you know, generally at least 3 months of rent in order to get into a place, because it's first, last, and a security deposit. And so the average monthly rent in King County is so expensive that if you do the math on that, a lot of families are paying more than $5,000 just to move in, and low income folks don't have it. I mean, a lot of folks don't have that kind of money just set aside. It is, I think most American residents don't have like an extra $600 in their bank account to cover an emergency cost. So I don't know why we think it's realistic to ask folks to come up with $5,000 every time they need to move. Will, next slide. So capping late fees. This is a really, really important one. Unincorporated King County capped theirs at 1.5% of the monthly rent. And Auburn caps theirs at 10, just a flat $10 per month. An example that I want to provide for this one is we had a tenant who has a Section 8 voucher, was being evicted, and we were able to, this was pre-pandemic as well. So we were able to assist with, the home-based funding that we had. I went through her ledger. Her monthly portion, was maybe $200, but her ledger had over $2,000 in late fees. So we're asking these families that are on Section 8 vouchers, these households that are just, getting by on a month to month, are accruing these late fees because there's just no limit on them. A landlord can charge, $100 flat rate, the second day that rent is late, and then, they can do daily charges. And a lot of these apartment complexes do. They're charging $5 or $10 a day. I've seen a small landlord charge $50 a day in late fees, which I'm not going to do the math on that right now, but that's a lot of money in late fees that they are asking, these tenants to pay every single month. And the state law to reinstate a tenancy, it only requires the tenant to pay up to $75 of the late fees anyway. So they can't be evicted for any amount beyond that. But if we're only having tenants pay $75 of late fees to reinstate their tenancy when they're being evicted, why are we even letting landlords charge more than that in late fees altogether? It's just, we're punishing people for falling behind, and we're not giving them a chance to catch up. It just puts people in this cycle that they're never going to get out of. Next slide. So longer notice for large rent increases. So unincorporated King County, if you're, landlords have to give 120 days notice, at least for any increases over 3%. Seattle just passed theirs. So for any increase at all, it's 180 days. This is really important just because it gives folks an opportunity, the choice to, if I can't afford this, at least I have more time to move and I'm not going straight into homelessness. Right now, the state passed, 60 days, which may seem like a long amount of time, but it's not. I personally speaking, as somebody who was a, domestic violence advocate who helped folks look for housing, it is really, really hard to locate new housing in 2 months or less. So it is just, if we're not going to make it affordable for folks, if we're not going to do rent stabilization, it's just really important to give folks more time to be able to look for a place that they can afford. So we're not setting them up to fail. So they're not getting evicted and they don't have an eviction on their record. And then, it makes it that much harder to find housing, as other folks have already mentioned. Thanks, Nigel. And it looks like Kenmore requires 90 days for increases over 10%. That's amazing. Okay, next slide. So no rent hikes for unsafe or unlivable housing. This seems really just kind of common sense, but the amount of tenants that we hear from where their landlord is increasing their rent because even though, you know, they don't have running water, their electricity is off all the time, the plumbing doesn't work. And, you know, and nobody's really enforcing this, unfortunately. A lot of outside of, you know, places like Seattle and unincorporated King County, and Seattle is the only one really with kind of the enforcement piece through the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspection. It's just, I mean, I don't know how else to put it other than it's not fair to ask tenants to pay more in rent if you're not going to give them kind of just a livable place. King County renters really just need like a general rental registration program, you know, where landlords are having to disclose that they do have a rental unit, that they register it so the city knows, and that inspections can be done and code enforcement is being done. So it really just benefits everybody. That is everybody that's living in the county, right? That we know we have safe homes that are out there, that people are living in safe conditions, and they're not being taken advantage of. And this really impacts communities like the immigrant community, the undocumented community, because their landlords are, you know, can use this as a reason to make them just put up with it. Because, hey, I'm renting to you, you know, like you can go and rent somewhere that's higher, good luck getting in. Due to your lack of status, I'm not going to fix anything though, because you should be lucky that I'm even renting to you. This happens a lot. So it's really, really important for cities to implement their own rental registration program. Yeah. Will, next slide. So the ability to adjust the rent due date. So unincorporated King County passed this as part of their tenant protections package over the summer. Seattle and Auburn both have this as well, but it allows a tenant to adjust their rent due date if they're on a fixed income source. So for example, a lot of folks that are on Social Security, they don't get it on the first of the month. It comes on the 5th or later. It's generally the same time, around the same time every month. So it gives them the option to ask their landlord to adjust the due date so they can pay on time, so they're not constantly paying late and then getting charged these exorbitant late fees. It also prohibits a landlord from refusing to rent to somebody, you know, if they do need that accommodation. It's protecting those that are most vulnerable, those that are, you know, like on these fixed incomes. If we can't control that, they can't control that. But they shouldn't be punished for something that is completely beyond their control. They can't ask the state to adjust their Social Security payment, you know, date that they get it. So this is really an option that protects those tenants. Well, next slide. So not allowing landlords to require a Social Security number. So they can, I want to be clear that they can still request it. So unincorporated, this was a really big issue that we ran into with unincorporated King County over the summer, was that there was a lot of misinformation going around that that the ordinance prevented landlords from asking a Social Security number altogether or running a credit report. A credit report can be ran without a social security number. They can still do a tenant screening report without a social security number. This really impacts communities of color, the immigrant community, because they might not have a social security number. So this allows folks to use other, forms of identification, like an ITIN number if they have it, or just provide some other form of identification. I think being able to show, like, pay stubs and things like that, that you can pay rent, should be sufficient enough. And thank you, Hugo. ITIN stands for Individual Tax Identification Number. But I don't think that it needs to be mandated. Like I said, landlords can still ask for it. It just doesn't require, they just can't require it. And just use it to discriminate against tenants, who might not have a social security number. Next slide, Will. Katie, you want to take this one?
Sure, I can do that. So economic evictions. So we talked a lot about how people are often forced to move because of large rent increases, something that's going on a lot right now. And there are a couple of cities which have found a way to tackle this. Part of the difficulty that we face here in Washington State is that we have a state ban on rent control. So we're really limited in the ways that we can kind of directly regulate rents and rent increases. So this is kind of a way to incentivize not doing large rent increases without kind of mandating it. So basically, if a landlord raises the rent more than a certain amount, and in the two cities, Seattle and Portland, that have passed this, that amount has been 10%. If a landlord raises the rent 10% or more, and a renter has to move because they can't afford it, the landlord has to contribute to paying relocation costs. And in Portland, there's kind of a fee schedule depending on kind of how many bedrooms the apartment is. In Seattle, it's 3 times monthly rent. And so this both helps someone, if they do have to move, cover the costs of moving. And it also just kind of, again, incentivizes a landlord not to do that 10% or more rent increase to begin with. So yeah, so this is something that we think is potentially a really good solution to rent increases and homelessness due to rent increases that we're seeing a lot right now.
Great. So I wanted to, and these are this is legislation that what we just saw was legislation that other cities have passed, and that was sort of part of what we're calling our the model ordinance on a package of renter protections. But now I actually wanted to hand it over to Andrea to talk a little bit about some things we heard from the testimonials and some other ideas. And just so you all know, we're going to present a couple more ideas, and then we're really excited to hear from you all as the legislators, incoming legislators, on what you're hearing, what you're interested in, and any questions you might have on all this stuff we presented. But first, for some newer ideas, Andrea, do you want to take over for the next couple of slides?
Yeah, so as stated today, a growing concern is just the use of credit scores by landlords to deny renters from using alternate sources of income to secure a new lease. So many people who have vouchers or are using short-term subsidies have poor credit or no credit. And the process for securing an alternative source of income voucher is thorough, and it comes with a rent guarantee. So when they require higher credit scores, it seems like it's a pretext for discrimination, often running counter to the objectives of the publicly funded housing subsidy programs and the eligibility process already endured by voucher recipients. Denial of housing based solely on credit scores disproportionately impacts seniors and people of color, but specifically Black women. So we are really seeing the racialization of who's ending up homeless and the trauma that is endured. So Source of income discrimination is a state legislation, but we need local enforcement, and we need the opportunity to educate landlords and to make sure that these precious resources that are tax credit, these are tax dollars that folks contribute to, and they're reliable sources of income. And we need better protections for folks who are using these vouchers to be able to get into housing and not have to continue to prove their worth, their housing worthiness, I guess is my ending statement there. And so we are, we really want to enforce renter, get enforcement for renter protections outside of the city of Seattle. It's critical. We need to make sure our housing stock is maintained. And most cities in King County are in need of residential code enforcement concerning housing habitability. We are interested in a regional approach. Rental registration fees are a potential revenue source, and there's opportunity for this regional approach to ensure renters' rights are enforceable, given just the great resources that are already embedded within the tax assessor's office. They're already tracking each property. So there's some creative ways to think about what we're already investing in and maybe how to leverage those investments. And then I've just had the benefit of being able to participate in a King County Bridges and Roads Task Force. In that space, elected officials, community partners were brought together to talk about how we're going to fund our roads and bridges. I also got to participate and actually ensure that we are having enforcement on public works projects and that there's jobs opportunity. And Regional Priority Hire Advisory Committee has been fundamental in making sure that no matter what city you're in King County, you're going to be able to access living wage jobs and job training opportunities that's paid. And then most recently, South King County cities announced in the news that they're going to collaborate on public safety. And so if we can just look to those as guides to think about how can we invest in our housing stock, how can we ensure that landlords are compliant with their duties and that renters are able to have their rights enforced. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Andrea. So yeah, that was a lot of new information, obviously, tons of different legislative ideas, and you've heard a lot. And the main thing is we want to offer to follow up with you after this and talk about whatever you think you're thinking about. But we did want to take some time to hear from you all. And I think Katie's going to help facilitate this, and we've got some questions here to think about, but we'd like to hear from you all as the electeds, and you can sort of look through these questions and see what speak to you. But from what you've heard today, from what you've heard from constituents in the past, what of this is the most interest to you? How can we support you? Those kinds of things. So we wanted to just encourage folks to, join the conversation. You can unmute if you're able to, or raise your hand, and just wanted to hear any reactions or thoughts that you all have had.
Yeah, so I'll try to facilitate this here. So I'll just read the questions out loud and then just kind of open floor. I think I've got this set so that I can see all of you. So you can use the little hand icon, or you can wave your actual hands wildly, or you can just come off mute. So first question, what are you seeing or hearing from your constituents? Second question, which proposed solutions do you have further questions about? Third question, what support do you need in advancing these solutions? And 4, finally, what would your timeline look like for introducing and passing some legislation? Any thoughts? I see a hand from Jake Simpson.
Yeah, I was a little bit late on the call, so I apologize, but I came in around number 5, I think. And for one, this is just thrilling to me. Like with our progressive majority on the council now, I feel like our timeline is going to be quick. I feel like we should move on this stuff really quickly. I know that things can get tied up in all kinds of red tape, but I think we can really move the needle on a lot of this stuff. what I'm seeing, the one piece of this that I want to talk about in particular, what I'm seeing from constituents is at places like the Sandpiper Apartments here in SeaTac especially, walking through there, there's like dried leaves on the ground from like 2 years ago. And, you know, there's mold growing in like cracks and all this stuff. There's kids with like breathing problems living in these first floor apartments with like mildew growing underneath the carpet. And there doesn't seem to be any incentive for the landlords to like deal with any of those things or any way to enforce them to create better living conditions for these folks. And it's mostly the people who live there are mostly immigrant, refugee, people of color. And yeah, it was just difficult knocking doors in that area throughout the campaign and seeing people living like that. So the code enforcement is a really particularly exciting piece for me. And I guess that's it.
Great, thank you, Jake. Yeah, that's enforcement is a big tricky issue that's very, very important. Well, I'm going to jump in and speak for Kenmore Deputy Mayor Nigel Herbig, who had to leave us, so he can't object to me speaking for him. But I know that he and Kenmore Council member Karina File are planning to bring up renter protections in their January kind of council retreat where they set their legislative plan for the year. So they are hoping to get that kind of adopted as part of their work plan for 2022. I don't know to what extent other councils around the county have a similar process of kind of setting your agenda at the beginning of the year, but if so, that might be something to think about. Anyone else? Questions, thoughts, plans?
I can share a little bit, I guess. I'm Hugh Garcia, Burien Council member elect, but I, like Sarah Moore, have been pretty involved with Burien's tenant rights and housing rights fights. Constituent wise, I mean, it's doorbelling and knocking on doors. It's what's already been covered. Like it's really, really, really hard to keep up with rent increases. I think we did a pretty good job a couple of years ago when we organized around that. But you can always do better. It took us a couple of years to actually get I think a new enforcement officer hired, which was recently hired. So I really think it's going to be important to try to be a little bit proactive on improving on the current policies that you do have or don't have, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. It took us, almost like 3 years, I think, or two, a little bit over two, maybe, to get everything through in Burien. So I would say to be proactive about putting this in early in your agenda. We literally are still really new into getting onto the council, haven't even sworn in, but I'm starting to learn a little bit about agenda setting and just looking at the focus that the current council will look into the next couple of years at least. So yeah, just sharing that piece.
Great, thank you, Hugo.
Practice with CTAC with Jake to have maybe our staff make sure they communicate with you guys' staff, because we were right in just rolling out having folks need to register that you're renting or not. I actually live in a duplex and with my brother, and I remember a year, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I got a letter saying, hey, you have to register if you're renting. And I was like, well, we're not. But it was great to see that progression from when we were behind the backyards, people's backyards organizing, to now. So it could take some time. I think collaborating and asking our city staff to collaborate would be helpful.
Totally, yeah, thank you. Anyone else want to chime in?
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Hail, as tonight, CTAC. So, whoa. Okay, is my computer still, am I here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
I don't know what happened. My screen just went completely blank. Yeah, so my question is around just King County Housing Authority, and we have many residents, several facilities in CTAC that are designated for seniors, families, individuals with disabilities. And so I'm just curious, just looking through all the solutions that you proposed, which are incredible. So thank you for sharing and going into detail on all those protections. I'm curious, just looking at most of these, these are either Seattle or King County has incorporated a lot of these protections, specifically in unincorporated King County. And I'm curious, when it comes to King County Housing Authority, do those protections apply for those residents? Like, is King County implementing it as well for King County Housing Authority residents, or is it just applicable to those who live in unincorporated King County? I'm asking this again because we have a significant population in CTAC. I think there's over 1,000 residents at least who reside at one of those locations.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty sure that the legislation that the King County Council passed only applies geographically to the unincorporated areas of King County, because that's kind of their area of jurisdiction. And perhaps Michelle knows more about this than I do, but King County Housing Authority presumably has some of its own internal kind of rules for how it works, as well as being subject to kind of state law.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just curious. But as Jake mentioned earlier, super excited to get digging into these solutions. So thank you for today.
Great, thank you.
And I would just like to offer that King County Housing Authority, they have a landlord liaison program and a residential services program. And there is an extra layer of protections, but the source of income discrimination is an issue that they've also identified. And just the code issues were also issues that I did speak with them recently within the last few days, and can say that that's something that they're seeing as well. And it would be great if there was opportunity for King County Housing Authority to their advocates to maybe talk about what they're seeing in terms of the vouchers.
Okay, anything else? Questions, thoughts? No wrong answers.
Hi there, this is Rami from Bothell City Council member-elect. Along here with Jenny Aldrich, also council member-elect. We won our elections this year. We haven't spoken much, we're new. We love to soak in all this information. So thank you so much for inviting us and going through the slides. We'd love to get the slides and these 10-point suggestions that we walked through a bit earlier, so that we can consider them here. We have majority progressives also now in city of Bothell, so I think we can move the needle a bit here. They're still city government, so it will take some work, but I'm confident that we can do something about it in the city of Bothell. So if you would share with us the information afterwards, that would be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Yes, we will absolutely follow up with the slides and the model legislation.
Thank you.
Drew, do you want to, I see a hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question. I'm really honored to have been here. amongst all these people today, this elects that are coming to speak, that came together to bring this space at this time in the evening, just as a constituent of some of these folks, and Father First, just a very vocal community advocate who's been a part of a lot of change, from defunding SPD to forefronting, I mean, numerous things in our community that are very crucial to BIPOC communities. But again, I'm a father first, and just knowing how inflation has doubled in my lifetime, and concern for my children's, that, you know, the way that the markets are going, and we don't know any determination when we're going to be out of COVID. We got this new variant, so forth, and it's just spinning our wheels continuously. Like, I've been advocating for houseless rights since 2016. I've been down to Olympia. I've been on city committees for budgeting, and I'm just saying, like, it's what's going to really change when people become from, you know, elected to when they're actually these elected officials. Like, are these policies, how are these policies going to really change? Like, I mean, talk is one thing, but having the effect to really have the pen hit the paper to produce that change for, you know, our future generations who rely on us for the decisions that we're making right now, it's imperative. Like, housing should be a human right, and especially like in this country, you know, when we sit here and we look at the metropolis we've built for tech hubs like Amazon, Facebook, Bezos' corporations, like, this is ridiculous as to how we can just watch the markets go up, baby, and not do nothing about it. Like, I mean, I know that there's been a lot of progressive things done. I'm not trying to take away the credit of how we've been able to, you know, stop some of these things. But as we got Inslee over here letting the moratorium expire, you know, other than Seattle, there's not really much of a fail-safe for other people, and there wasn't one before. So what kind of radical actions that are necessary now? Like, this is just something that people need to sleep on. Like, you guys are elected by the constituents. Congratulations. It's a beautiful thing. And I hope that, you know, the work that you guys put into your campaigns pays off, because it's going to be a long road ahead, and everybody knows that. But I just really wanted to say, like, as somebody who sat here and listened to tonight's conversations about a lot of this stuff, all for helping in any way possible, shape, and form. But it's just, know that, like, I'm watching closely, because we've had a lot of promises. As somebody who sat here and went to multiple council members' front doors during the revolution, Jenny Durkin's house, you name it. I mean, we were there at the Everyday March, marching our butts off. Like, I don't got to speak on that, but, you know, like, just know that that same energy goes in towards fighting for basic human rights and housing as well. Like, this is all summed up into the same nutshell. And I just hope that these elected officials take seriously these constituents who are also in these meetings, who don't get paid for the results, but really truly care. So I just hope that, you know, these people that are stepping up into these positions are really going to pay it forward to those people that put them in those seats of power. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Will, shall we move along to the state?
Yeah, for sure. We can move along.
Since I see people are dropping off.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks, True. Thanks to all the electeds for participating in that. So we just wanted to talk a little bit about next steps. You know, here's sort of our idea about the next steps, and kind of what we can, you know, one of the questions in the discussion was, what can we do to support you? You know, obviously there's a lot of council elects, which is so awesome to see that you all are already stepping into this. You know, Stay House, Stay Healthy can support, and has supported in a whole number of ways. And I just wanted to, Katie, I know I'm sort of taking, I don't know if this is my time, I kind of forgot, but one of the things that I wanted to mention too, that you can support us is, you know, connecting us with groups and community groups in your areas that we can talk to. We're always trying to, you know, build our coalition, and, you know, we're a group of advocates and organizers, and also providers, service providers, including housing and legal providers. So, you know, we can get the word out, we can get information out, and services, connected services, all sorts of stuff. So if you have groups that you think we'd like to talk, that would be good for us to talk to, please send them along. But just wanted to put that little plug in too. But basically, you know, this is kind of our goal, is to build this support and try to get these types of renter protections on the legislative calendar for 2022. And I think Katie talked about kind of Ken Moore's process, how it sort of needs to start pretty early in the year. But this is kind of what we're thinking about, is that between now and the beginning of 2022, we'd be happy to, in addition to sending you the information from tonight, follow up with one-on-one conversations, provide more information about past efforts, do more brainstorming about some of the new ideas that we had, any of that. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be reaching out too, but feel free to, schedule some time if you want to hear more, and we can talk more about how we can support. And then, yeah, we're going to continue organizing and meeting, and would love more people, more groups, more community members and part of our coalition. So if you can help us connect with them too, that would be awesome. So yeah, that's kind of our next steps. Katie or anyone else, is there anything to add to that? Okay, cool. So then one more thing is just wanted to hand the mic over to Michelle Thomas from the Washington Low Income Housing Association to talk a little bit about opportunities for you all as local elected officials to also support work that's happening at the state level that is potentially additive to the work that needs to happen at the local level. Michelle?
Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Michelle from the Housing Alliance, the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, and the Housing Alliance Action Fund.
What did I say?
You said association. It's okay.
Oh, sorry.
It doesn't matter. I mean, it matters a little bit, that's all. So I just wanted to say a couple of words to urge you as local elected officials to help us pass state level legislation. This is not to say that you can do this or to encourage you to do this as an alternative to passing local tenant protections. There's nothing that can replace that. But we really need local elected officials to show up in Olympia, especially because some of the big issues that we'll be working on in 2022 are going to be hard to pass, and are going to need the push from local elected officials. Last year, a lot of really great local elected officials from across the state showed up time and time again to testify on key tenant protections, and it really made a very significant difference. In addition to testifying publicly in Olympia, local elected officials who wanted to help us get the statewide just cause bill passed, the right to cancel, the document recording fee, which doubled funds for homelessness prevention services, and big investments in the Housing Trust Fund and rapid acquisition. All of that was really helped along by the voices of local elected officials, not just showing up for testimony, but also lobbying locally, calling your delegation, having meetings, but also working to the extent possible, getting your city council to pass resolutions of support for the state level bills that were being proposed. And if some of you also, or some local elected officials who aren't here tonight, also went to their local party and got resolutions of support from the local party, which can also be really helpful. This year, there is going to be a bill introduced that will address the rent gouging that you've heard so much about today. Representative Nicole Macri from the 43rd Legislative District will be introducing a bill, and minimally, it will include a repeal of the ban on local rent regulations. That is definitely one in particular we're really going to need local elected officials to show up for and to support. State level lawmakers are going to have to hear that this is something that you want passed at the state level, so you can have the local conversation. The bill isn't written yet, but we also anticipate it will create a state level cap on rent increases. As we've talked about several times today, what we're able to pass at the state level is absolutely critical, but you should see it as the floor, right, for tenant protections. And a lot of local action is oftentimes needed to improve those protections and the closed loopholes that, just because of the nature of Olympia right now, oftentimes get written into the protections in order to get things passed. Obviously, Tram went through a lot of the model ordinances, and a lot of what you can do at the local level is to close those loopholes and to make up for what isn't passable or possible at the state level. So anyhow, setting a cap at the state level, but also giving you all the right locally to improve that at the local level, I think will need to go hand in hand. But in order for anything like that to move forward, like I've said, we really are going to need local voices. One other thing too that local elected officials really did last year is they helped connect us, the Housing Alliance, with other local advocates and other local voices that could sway your state level delegation. So that's another really helpful way that you can get involved. So I'll put my email in the chat. And, you know, if you are willing to weigh in on state level protections, that would be really great. As you can see in the screen in front of you, there's going to be some really ambitious tenant protections. In addition to the anti-rent gouging bill, there's going to be the Housing Justice Act, which will be modeled off of Seattle's Fair Chance Housing, which will prevent landlords from categorically denying housing to folks based on an arrest or conviction record, or a family member's arrest or conviction record. That is really exciting. I'm excited to see some of the excited faces for that, but it's going to be a big lift. And so local voices are going to be really important for that. There's also going to be a bill introduced to enforce the Residential Landlord Tenant Act. So this one's also really exciting. It's also going to be a really big lift, but it's going to add a lot of teeth to the protections we already have at the state level. And there's also going to be another bill introduced that's going to be a registration requirement for all landlords statewide. They'll have to register with the state. That will be particularly a really important opportunity to get information on the state's rental housing stock. So all of these are big lifts. They're very ambitious for a short 60-day session. So please, please consider this your call to action to help us get these passed. And with that, I'll pass it on to Katie for closing, and I'll put my email in the chat.
Great. Am I supposed to do the closing, or well? Thank you all for coming. This was great. Yeah, it's wonderful to see lots of people here, and we are looking forward to continuing this conversation with all of you and moving things hopefully towards action in a bunch of cities around the county. And I think that the more that we can do to advance these things simultaneously in various cities, that will kind of, we are stronger together. So let's do this, and we'll follow up. I'll try to follow up tomorrow, or someone else will be emailing you with materials from tonight, including the model ordinance and other useful things, our slideshow, etc. Yeah, great, cool.
Yeah, tell your council colleagues how cool it was, how much they missed. And share with all this information too, because we want to, yeah, be sure we're talking to everyone, people you know at other cities too. Just, yeah, helping us get the word out would be awesome.
Great.